Okay, in this video, I'm going to take up where I stopped off in the last video of creating a simple frame, and I just want to show some modifications on this piece. Okay, so we're going to take the original piece that I had done in the previous video. We're just going to do a slightly more complicated frame for this. Okay, so we're taking this one that we've created, and I'm going to just open the group. Okay, and I'm just going to hide that grouping so I can just get to the individual pieces. And we're just going to take this piece right here and we're just going to isolate it. And we'll bring up our material editor. And here's our painting that's on there. And we'll load a different one in here so that we can see how we would deal with it if it's a different shape. So I'm just going to hold down my shift key and drag this down so we can still come back to this one if we want to. And I'm going to load a different image in. So let's go for this one. Okay, so this is a piece by another artist called Florian Bertmer, and he does some really nice poster work, and so we're going to deal with this one. And so let's go ahead and turn this on so we can see it in our viewport, and you'll see that it's distorted. Okay, because it's a different size and proportion than our original one, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to take what we originally had and to size it. Okay, so we go back to the same thing. We're going to put a UVW map on this, go down, turn on the end product, okay, and on the UVW map, we do the same thing. We're going to go here and hit bitmap fit and pick our bitmap, and you'll see that it's now it's the right proportions. So we go back down here and let's just switch to the front view. And I take these vertices and just slide them back in to get them to the correct size. Right there. And then the same thing in here. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now that's the correct size. And so now our frame's the wrong size. But because of the way we stack this, we can go all the way back down to our original frame, okay, that we made from a spline. And now I can do the same thing to it. Now I've did an outline of this, so I need to select both of these and drag these in. And then do the same in here. And then our frame is back to the correct size. Okay, so that's how easy that was to, resize that to get it to another piece. But what I'd like to do is to make a little bit more detailed frame for this. Okay, so what we're going to do is go back down to our piece here, and we're going to go back and do the same thing we did before, where I'm going to pick the actual spline at a sub-object mode, and we're going to go back in here to outline, and now I'm going to outline this to go back in, and then I'm going to do the same on this piece. And what I'm going to do is create us a little inset around this, okay, so just a little bit more detailed. Okay, so we go back, and now when we go back up, what's going to happen here is, since that's lines inside of other lines, it'll show up as a hole in there, okay, which is fine. But now what I'm going to do is go back up to this edit poly I have in here, and I'm going to select this back piece and delete, and I'm going to select this back piece, delete. I don't need those. And now what that's going to do is allow me to come in here, grab my border, hold down my control key, and grab both of these borders, because that's an open edge now, and I can click the bridge, and I can bridge that, and that will get me a little solid piece in there. So I'm going to select polygon, which will select those, and I don't want them to be that deep in there. So we're going to go to move, and we're just going to pull it forward a little bit on our y-axis. So that's just a small inset. It's not the whole depth of that. Okay. Okay, now what I want to do is to put a different material in there. I want to kind of accent it. So what I want to do is kind of make this seem like this is a custom-made frame for this poster. So what I want to do is sample a color off the poster that I'm going to use in a shader in there. So I'm just going to go to my utility panel, and I'm going to go in and pick color clipboard, and I'm going to click new floater right here, and this will float me a little clipboard out here that I can sample colors from. So I'm going to click on this spot right here. My little color picker will come in, and I'm just going to get my eyedropper, and I'm going to sample this yellow color, this kind of a orangish kind of color that's in here. And that's what I'm going to accent this with, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is to come in here and create another shader for that, okay? So I'm going to take this shader that I already have on the frame, and I'm going to turn down the reflection on this. Let's go for maybe a 0.2 on the reflection and maybe a 0.4 on the highlight, okay, on that. And I left the original bump fairly high. I'm going to turn it down a little bit, 0.2, so it's not as prominent in there. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key, and I'm just going to copy this node. Now you'll see as I copy this by holding down the Shift key, these will still be plugged into it. And this is a way that I can be efficient in using my maps. I see a lot of people copying these nodes. I don't need to copy these nodes. I can control multiple things with it. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to unplug the diffuse out of this one, okay, and I'm going to go into my diffuse slot. I'm going to pull into the background standard, and what I want to do is get a composite node in here, okay. A composite node basically turns this in like it's Photoshop. It's like layers in Photoshop. And so on my first layer, I'm going to click here, drag into the background. I'm going to go standard, and I'm going to go color correction node. The color correction node is basically just a color node. So I'm going to double click on that and get to its options, and there's the color right here. So I'm going to drag this and drop it in here. And so now this color is driving that shader. Okay, I'm finished with the clipboard. I can close it. Now what I want is I want the a little bit of wood grain on this, so that the way I'm trying to make this seem like is that this area in here, it's all the same piece of wood, but like it was painted back in there, okay? So on the composite, I'm going to add a separate node, and what I'm going to do is add this bump map, okay? Because it's a black and white map, and all I want is the wood grain from it. I don't want any color from this, okay? So I'm going to run it back into that layer spot, and initially it'll just override that, okay, because it's on top. Now this gets confusing to people a little bit. When you look over here, this is stacked like Photoshop. So this is the bottom layer, layer 1, this is 2, this is laying on top. In here, they go backwards because they're adding layers at the bottom. So this one, which is layer 2, is actually kind of like this, floating on top of that one. So what I'm going to do is go in here and click on multiply, and then it's just going to add the darkness of this back onto that color, and that's what I want. So it's the same wood grain, it's got the same bump on it, it's got the same sheen to it, but now I've colored it different than using the original bitmap. Okay, now I want to put this in here. Now to put this in here, you know, if you go to edit poly and I pick these polys, Max doesn't allow you to put that shader in there. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this mapping coordinate right here. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm just going to collapse this whole thing. So I'm just going to collapse it all. And now I can go in here, and it'll hold my selection I already had in here. And now I can come in here, and let's name this. This is my frame inlay. And we'll assign that in there, okay? Now, you initially won't see it showing up in there. You've got to come in here and turn this button on, okay? And then you'll be able to see your wood grain in there. And so we've added that back into it, okay? So we've added a little of an inset in here. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste my mapping coordinate. Now, I don't really need the mapping coordinate in here, but I may decide I want to manipulate it later. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop it back in for right now. Okay, now, so what we have here, let's just go in here and render this, okay? And let's just do a region render. Just do that part right there. And we'll render this. Now, this will come in a little dark, okay? And I don't want to have to put any lights in here right now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my exposure control and turn my exposure control on, the middle ray exposure control. And then if I just clamp this down a little bit, open up the aperture a little bit, it'll make it a little bit brighter. Now, eventually I'll take all that back down, but just when I'm doing my experiments right now, I'm going to want a little bit more light in here. Okay, now you'll see that our bevel stayed in here and it stayed on the inside, but it did not create this bevel on the inside in here. And I don't really want a bevel in there, but what I do want is a manufactured edge, and you'll see how this edge is very sharp in here, and I don't want that sharp edge. I want to catch a little bit of a highlight in there. So if I go back down to this frame material, okay, and I go in the area where it says special effects, I can go in here and there's a section called rounded corners. And what that does, it's a shader trick to actually create a little rounded corner to your render, okay, to your shader, to your object. So now you'll see when we come in here, we're getting a little bit of a rounded edge to this. It's a shader trick. It only works for little small areas, but it's pretty nice. Okay, instead of having to go in there and add a bevel to that. And so you'll see that when we go back down, and I think I'm going to kick it up a little bit. It's 1/4 of an inch right now. I'm going to make it a little bit more dominant. So when we render from further away, you'll see, we can see that nice highlight that's going down there. See that little highlight? That's what's causing that, okay? And this is what's missing from a lot of people's work. They have digital looking work, okay? Let's just turn that off for a second. And let's pull up our RAM player. So I'm going to pull up a RAM player here, rendering, pulling down here, RAM player. And then I'm going to click this little teapot here, and that'll load our render here. And now let's re-render this again, and I'm going to turn off the rounded corners so we can kind of see it before and after. So I'll render this again. And these are all subtle things. These are subtle things, but that's what makes something very dynamic, is the little subtle things you do to it. Okay, so now you'll see I don't see that highlight in there. And this is the typical thing I get from, students when they're first starting to work, is they're just doing shortcuts. Okay, look at the difference between this one and that one. See those little highlights it puts in there? Makes it seem more manufactured than digital. Okay, so small little things. Let's go back, turn it back on. Okay, now another thing that you can do is maybe we want our poster to seem more like it's an actual painting. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I'm going to open up our image in here. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate this image on another layer. I always want to leave my original. And I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go to Filter Gallery. Okay, now there's all kinds of different kind of filters you can run on this. Okay, but what I'm going to do is to come down here under Texture, and I'm going to go to Texturizer, and I'm going to put a canvas texture on this to make it seem like this was painted on canvas. There are different kinds, burlap, sandstone. There are different ones in here, but I want this to seem like it's painted on a canvas. And then you have your scale of this canvas. Okay, be sure you don't get this too big. I see people getting their stuff seem out of whack with the scale of it. Okay, so, and then you can, how much you want the relief pattern in there. Okay. Okay, so something like that. And really we can just desaturate this because it's just going to read black and white. And we'll save this out as a bump map. Okay, so let's save this out. I'm going to save it as a Targa file. And I'm going to label it the same name as what my diffuse map was. And I'm going to put it as a 24-bit Targa. We don't need 32-bit. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my material editor, and we're going to find our canvas here. Let's just take this bitmap, hold down my shift key, and I'm going to dump it into my bump, double click on it, and then I'm going to load this in. Okay. Now, when I'm doing my bumps, I unplug the diffuse. Okay. You can unplug it, or if you want to go back to the shader itself, you can go down here where it says General Maps down here and uncheck this, and that'll turn it off. Because when I first want to render this, I just want to see the nature of the bump by itself. Okay, so I'm not really wanting to see the diffuse on there. I want to see how much bump that I'm getting in the piece. Let's shift this up a little bit. Yeah, something like that. So I just want to see the bump. How much bump am I laying in there? Okay, now you'll see by default, that's a pretty high bump that's on that. Okay, that's a lot more than what I really want. Okay, and it's hard to see that if you have the diffuse on there. So I always initially do my bumps without the diffuse. So I'm going to come back in here, and here's my bump amount. I'm going to go to 0.1. Let's look at that. That's much better. Okay. I think one of the problems with a lot of young texture artists is they put way too much bump on things. They don't want to put bump on it. They want to put bump. They want to scream bump. I want to bump. You know, we don't want to scream bump map at us. Okay. These are all subtle things that we're doing. Okay. Let's look at it with our diffuse back on. Okay. Take. And then we can see what it's doing with the bump map on there. Now, I think the bump is still a little high for me, and it's according to how close my rendering's going to be. If I was going to do real up-close renderings, I'd probably take it back down. But the reality is this is not going to, this is going to be hanging on a wall, and so it's not going to be really close to us. So let's go render it something more like this. And this is giving us more of the look that we're going to be seeing when it's hanging on the wall. And so we're just getting a little subtle bump on that. And I think I'm going to kick up my reflection a little bit on this. And the specular just a little bit, so it's got a little bit more of a sheen to it. Now, I'm not going to put a glass over the top of this, okay? For the most part, we're going to be hanging on this on a wall across the room. It's not the focus, and so I'm probably not going to put a piece of glass over the top because it'll just take longer to render and probably won't be able to tell that there's a piece of glass on it. Now, it's according to how close. If I'm going to be fairly close to this, then I might put a piece of glass on there, okay? So you just have to determine when you're doing something, is it really worth it? I don't think in the way I'm going to be using in this, it's really worth putting the glass on it, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, then that's pretty much it. Okay, so what we've been able to do is to show how to take our original one and manipulate it, okay? How to make a secondary color that we can sample, okay? Going over here using our clipboard and sampling a color from our object, putting a separate shader in there, choosing the same kind of wood pattern, so it'll just seem like it's the piece of wood. It was carved out a piece of wood, and then they, came in and stained that, okay, or painted it in there. I'm leaving that manufactured edge without having to go in here and actually create a chamfer. So we got a chamfer here, chamfer on the inside, and then a manufactured highlight on these. We've got our painting in there, and then we've gone in and added a secondary pattern, a bump. A lot of people, what they want to do on their bumps is they just take this and then they run it in here. That's not correct. That's not how you do a bump. Okay, I see people do it all the time. They just want to take, they want to do the shortcut. They don't want to do anything good. Okay, just shortcuts and drop this in here. Okay, this is not what I want for a bump. Okay, very seldom is that ever going to work. Okay, and so now you've got a little bit more detailed piece, and I think that's all I wanted to cover in this one. Okay, thank you very much.